There are historical truths that do not lie in dusty treaties, nor in the tactical diagrams of generals. It lies around the neck of a child. Imagine you are standing in the middle of a parched land on the Khuzestan border in 1982. The intense heat of the Gulf seems to want to burn everything, but nothing is as burning as the atmosphere of the Iran-Iraq War. Amidst the pitch-black gun smoke and the roar of Katyusha rocket launchers, long lines of small silhouettes appeared. The children did not wear well-fitting uniforms, the oversized khaki clothes were baggy on bodies that had not yet had time to grow. But what is haunting is the object hanging on their chests, a yellow plastic key, hanging loosely by a braided string. What would you do if you were given a key and promised that it would open the door leading straight to heaven? That is not a question in a fairy tale. That was the brutal reality of tens of thousands of children in the Basij army. 12-year-old children, even 9-year-olds, smeared with mud and dirt, their eyes shining with a strange belief to a frightening degree. They did not hold AK-47 rifles, they held faith. And that faith was materialized by a cheap plastic toy but carried the weight of life and death. Why would a child be willing to run into a minefield with a smile? What transformed these little angels into living mine detectors for an endless war? We will not just look at dry numbers, but will go deep into the soul of a stolen generation, to see that in the hell of war, sometimes innocence is the most fearsome weapon and also the most painful victim. To understand why children appeared on the front lines, we must go back in time to the autumn of 1980. Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, ordered the army to cross the border, attacking Iran with the hope of seizing lucrative oil wells while the neighbor was still reeling after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Saddam predicted a victory within 6 days. But he miscalculated one variable, the power of martyrdom, shahadat. When the invasion began, Iran under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini fell into a state of jihad. The regular army, Artesh, at that time was being purged after the revolution, weapons were under embargo, and aircraft components were depleted. Tehran stood on the brink of collapse. In that moment of life and death, Khomeini issued a decree that not only changed the face of the war but also changed global war ethics, the establishment of Basij Mustazafin, mobilization force of the oppressed. Basij was not an army. It was a volunteer militia movement filled with religious fervor. When the young men had fallen, the call of the clerics echoed in every corner, from the slums in Tehran to the poor villages along the Zagros mountains. They spoke of Imam Hussein, of the battle at Karbala in 680, where sacrifice for justice was considered the ultimate glory. For an Iranian child at that time, the world was no longer about games of hide and seek or math lessons. The world was divided into two distinct halves. One side was Yazid, the evil one, symbolized by Saddam Hussein, and the other side was the warriors of Allah. Blue buses full of students began to leave the school gates. On the bus windows were not images of cartoon characters, but portraits of young martyrs. The children left, carrying the blessings of their parents, the cheers of their teachers. They did not know that where they were going was not a radiant glory, but the mangrove lands in Basra, where Iraqi mines were as thick as desert sand. Innocence had been sharpened by the propaganda machine into a blade, and that blade was pointing straight toward the enemy's gun barrels. How do you convince a child that death is a gift? This is a question that makes any historian shudder when looking at the Iran-Iraq War. To have tens of thousands of teenagers ready to rush into minefields, the Tehran government at that time operated the most sophisticated propaganda machine, hitting the most vulnerable thing, innocence. Step into an elementary school classroom in Iran in 1982. Instead of poems about nature, the children learned about the beauty of martyrdom. Textbooks were reprinted, illustrated with images of boys wearing red scarves, holding roses in front of tank barrels. Clerics and propaganda officers went to every school, telling touching stories about Imam Hussein, the religious hero who sacrificed himself along with 72 companions to oppose a tyrant. They told the children, this life is only a temporary realm, and the battlefield is the most radiant shortcut to the arms of God. Music and cinema played the role of extremely strong catalysts. Marching songs with heroic, tragic melodies played every morning on school loudspeakers, urging the children to weigh anchor and leave their homeland. Carefully edited documentaries showed scenes of young soldiers smiling before going to battle, as if they were going to a grand party instead of a mass grave. More specifically, they created a strange honor system. The children who joined the Basij were called the Flowers of Khomeini. The children were given volunteer cards, and wore headbands with the words "Marching to Jerusalem." For a child, being recognized as an adult, being given the responsibility of saving the nation was an irresistible temptation. They hid from their parents to register, or there were even mothers who, out of fierce faith, personally tied the headband for their children, and said, "Do not return if you have not won or become a martyr." That propaganda machine succeeded in blurring the instinctive fear of death. It replaced the survival instinct with a supernatural belief. The yellow plastic key we mentioned in the previous chapter was the pinnacle of the materialization of that belief. It made death no longer an end, but an act of opening a door, a gentle transition from the hell of guns and bullets to a heaven full of flowers and sweet honey. In 1982, Operation Bait al-Muqaddas to liberate the port city of Khorramshahr began. Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army had established a defense system that Western military experts called impenetrable. These were minefields kilometers wide, interspersed with barbed wire higher than a person's head and fortified concrete bunkers containing heavy machine guns. Iraq had T-72 tanks, long-range artillery, and chemical weapons. Iran did not have those things, they only had people. On moonless nights in the Khuzestan desert, a horrific scene took place, something that surviving Iraqi soldiers later still recounted with extreme terror. From the darkness, thousands of Basij children held hands, forming long lines of living fences. The children did not fire guns, because in reality they were often not issued guns or only had old rifles without enough ammunition. When the signal whistle sounded, the human wave began to move. The children stepped forward, shouting in unison, "Allah Akbar! God is great!" That shout drowned out even the desert wind, but it did not drown out the explosion of mines. Boom! A boy on the left fell. Boom! Two boys on the right disappeared in a column of black smoke. But the line did not stop. According to the principle of human wave tactics, those in front had the duty to use their bodies to detonate mines. They cleared a narrow path for the regular army and tanks to advance behind. The children did not run, they walked calmly. There were reports saying that, to prevent the children from panicking and running away in the dark, they used ropes to tie the children's hands together in groups. Children in their teens, in fanaticism and innocence, stepped on the bodies of their friends to continue walking forward. Iraqi machine guns roared. The Iraqi soldiers on the other side of the front line were initially shocked. They did not understand why the opponent sent unarmed children to battle. There were Iraqi gunners who went crazy or refused to pull the trigger when seeing innocent faces in the crosshairs. But then, survival forced them to fire. Bullets tore apart the small bodies, blood soaked the desert sand, turning the parched land into a dark red swamp. After each such attack, when the sun rose, the scene left behind was a hell on earth. Thousands of flowers lay scattered, no longer intact. On many children's chests, the yellow plastic key was still there, smeared with blood and mud, but no door opened at all. Only the frightening silence of death. In the mid-80s, major Western newspapers such as the New York Times or Le Monde simultaneously reported on Iran importing millions of plastic keys from Taiwan and China. The purpose, according to these reports, was to distribute them to the children before they rushed into minefields. The image of the key to heaven immediately became a symbol of the cruelty of the Tehran regime in the eyes of the world. However, if you go deep into the archives in Iran, you will encounter a completely opposite stream of information. The Iranian government has always denied the physical existence of these plastic keys. They asserted that it was a malicious fabrication by the imperialist West to lower the self-patriotism of the Iranian people. Basij veterans later when interviewed often said, "We did not need plastic keys, because faith in Imam Hussein was already a key lying in our hearts." So where lies the truth? Many independent researchers believe that the truth lies in the middle. Perhaps there was no official state-level campaign to distribute millions of plastic keys, but in the fanatical atmosphere of the battlefield, many local militia units did it on their own initiative. Or, the key was just a symbolic item included in soldier gift sets. It included scarves, the Quran, and photos of the Ayatollah. But whether that key was made of Taiwanese plastic or was just an idea in the head, its consequence was 100% real. It locked down the critical thinking of the children, making them believe that death was a privilege. For a historian, whether the key physically existed or not is not as important as the fact that the belief in it led tens of thousands of lives to death. That is the pinnacle of tragedy, when innocence is turned into fuel for the war machine, and when people use cheap symbols to buy off the most sacred human values. The Iran-Iraq War ended in 1988 with a ceasefire agreement that Ayatollah Khomeini compared to drinking a cup of poison. The border returned to the starting line, with no winner or loser in geopolitical terms. But in human terms, both nations lost. If you have the chance to walk through martyr cemeteries in Tehran like Beheshti Zahra, you will see endless rows of small graves. On each grave, there is usually a glass box. Inside it are not only portraits of teenagers 13 or 14 years old with innocent smiles, but also their mementos. A pencil, a small doll for young female nurses, or a few pages of unfinished homework. The children who survived the war, the young Basij veterans, are now middle-aged men. Many of them carry permanent scars, not just scars from shrapnel or mustard gas, but scars in the soul. They grew up in a world where death was honored more than life, where sacrifice was taught before altruism. The story of the Key to Heaven Army is an eternal alarm bell for humanity. It reminds us that in any conflict, children are always the most vulnerable. Not just by bombs and bullets, but by extreme ideologies themselves. When adults are no longer capable of resolving conflicts with reason, they begin to borrow the future of children to burn in the fire of the present. Closing this page of history, we do not stand on any side to judge faith, but we stand on the side of humanity to grieve for innocence being exploited. Those plastic keys have perhaps rusted or vanished in the desert dust, but the question they left behind remains: when will humanity stop using the blood of children to decorate its own illusions? Our journey deep into the Iran-Iraq hell today ends here. This is not just a history lesson, but a reflection on the value of peace and the right to grow up in peace for every child in the world. If you feel moved or have different perspectives on this story, please share them with us in the comments section. Your contributions are the motivation for us to continue digging deep into forgotten historical truths. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to accompany us in the next audio episodes. History is a mirror reflecting the future, and we are here to look into that mirror together. Goodbye and see you again.